Hello, my beautiful, gorgeous dance baby, and welcome to another episode of More Than Dance. Today, we're going to be discussing the conversation that you don't want to have, but know that you need to. And this can be a conversation with someone that you love, a friend of yours, a spouse. It can even be the hardest conversation of them all, and that's the conversation with yourself. Now, when we're thinking about these conversations, it's usually something that we know we want to say and something that we're avoiding. And usually the reason why we are avoiding is because we are afraid of something. There's some type of fear that we're holding on to. And it could be fear of the unknown, fear of change, or it could be the fear of rejection. It could be the fear of embracing the scary thing that you didn't think that you could do. These types of conversations, they almost come up in our heads first. There's like a dialogue that goes on and it's like, we should probably talk about this. And then like that little entity in your brain that's like the other side is like, no, we don't. Let's not talk about it. And for whatever reason, it kind of just ends up being in this lingering energy. And sometimes when you don't know how to do something, you don't do it at all. And that's like prime procrastination. And there's different types of procrastination, but one of them is when you don't know how to do something, it's just all the questions. So therefore, like if you don't do it at all, you're just not living in that energy where it's like, oh gosh, I can't believe I don't know how to do this. So when we think about these conversations, there's a reason why they're in our heads. There's a reason why they're giving us a reminder. There's a reason why even maybe our body has a visceral reaction when we think about it. Maybe you start to feel anxious. Maybe you feel frustrated. Maybe there's an association that you've built when you think about the conversation that you want to have, and therefore you do or don't do something else. And it's because there's energy that needs to be let out. And there's this conversation that gets to be had. And I say gets to be had versus has to be had because it really is something that we get to do. We get to have the conversation to take care of ourselves. We get to have the conversation to make sure that our needs are met. And sometimes when you're having the difficult conversation with yourself, it can be hard to be the advocate for your future self. And your future self is always going to tell you things in a more cryptic, obscure way. And if you're a really good listener, you're going to be able to hear that and know how to receive the difficult conversation. Part of that is going to come with being open for the change, being open for receiving hard information. And that's tricky about difficult conversations is because it's not just that it's hard on your part. It could be hard on the person receiving the information. And if it's with yourself, that's kind of a separate thing. I'll talk about that in a second. But if you are planning on having a difficult conversation with someone that you love, then you're already considering that person's feelings and how they might react to it. And that person, depending on the subject matter, also is going to have a moment to be with that new information. And sometimes it can go really well, right? And you can just be like, wow, that was so much easier than I thought. Other times you might be shocked at how the information gets received. And you might be like, wow, that went worse than I thought. Or, oh, they're more upset than I thought they would be. And despite the fact that you're now living in that feeling of, okay, well, I just hurt this person having this conversation, at least you get to say, well, I was honest with myself and I was brave and I was able to say the really difficult thing. And then the next step is to deal with the forgiveness process or the process of being patient for that person that you told the difficult thing to come around. And if it's the conversation with yourself, it can be interesting to repeatedly know that you have something to do and something to say. And I think instead of it feeling hard to hear it because you're talking to yourself in your head, it's more like that again. Like, we haven't dealt with that yet. We haven't figured the solution out. You're still thinking about that. And so it becomes this more annoying thing where it's like, oh, well, why haven't you figured that out yet? So what I'm thinking about right now are the many times that I've talked to my current dancers and my my past dancers about the decisions that they make to come to the studio. And there's usually some type of dialogue. In fact, sometimes there's like this breaking point where it's like, I cannot go on living the way I'm living right now. It's not serving me anymore. It never was serving me. And in those instances, we get this idea of a broken record because it's like, I need something to change. Okay. And that's the awareness of it. And that's as far as it'll go sometimes. And then maybe the next step would be, I want something to change. And this is what I think could do it. Dance class. Okay, great. You figured out that you want the change. You've figured out what you think could help. And the only thing missing now, because what will happen is, okay, cool, dance will help. Let me keep watching some dance videos. Let me keep thinking about when I'll go to dance. And the most important thing is when you start taking action on that difficult conversation. So if you're talking to yourself, it could look like this. Hey, Chrissy, we need to have a really difficult conversation. And I'd be like, oh, okay. What are we talking about? Well, I want to talk to you about this idea of posting more on your social media. Oh my gosh, I think that's a great idea. I'd love to post more on my social media. Yeah, I think it would be really helpful for you to get the word out about how the studio is and how helpful you can be to new dancers. Oh my gosh, I love that. And it would be like, that's where the conversation ends. The next part of that conversation would be, yes, because I notice that you keep saying that you want to help more people and you're finding that it's hard for people to find out about your studio. Well, yes, that's so true. And even then the conversation could stop. And the questions that I want you to ask then when you're talking to yourself is, okay, well, what could I do? What's an action step towards this breaking point, towards this uncomfortable feeling, towards this broken record that I keep saying in my head? Post more, post more. Okay, well, how am I going to implement that? What's my action step? And the reason why that's just a small scale, right? Because you can probably fill in the blanks here of maybe way more difficult conversations with yourself and maybe way more difficult conversations that you could have with someone else. And I want you to just kind of like let that be, because we're always having conversations and everything varies. So I think it might be important to understand what makes something so difficult. And it might be important to just name it and say it out loud. Well, this is difficult because it's going to make the other person question me. This conversation could be difficult because it's asking someone to do something that they have never done before. This conversation could be difficult because you're stepping into an area that you haven't been before. Maybe you've never been disappointed by this person before, and you have to tell them that you feel disappointed. Maybe you disappointed them and you have to tell them something really hard. So it's pretty common to feel like you might hurt someone. You could feel misunderstood. You could feel like you could lose control. You could have this moment where you're confronting a situation that actually isn't even aligned with you anymore. So it's like part of you deeply knows that it's gonna say goodbye to this other part of you. And then that opens the door for grief and moving on and moving forward and leaving stuff behind and shedding layers of yourself because it no longer serves you. And sometimes accepting that you know what you need is hard, because what it does is it tells you that what you're currently doing isn't what you need, or it's not enough of what you need. And sometimes that can be a slap in the face, because we never want to not give ourselves what we need. And we never want to get into a situation where any kind of relationship is draining us, because what comes from that is the R word, resentment. And feeling that feeling is not good. And it's not good on your end or the counterpart. And then we get to think about what it would be like to not have this conversation, because then it's costing our sanity, our peace, and it's going to be something, again, that we're constantly thinking. And then there's the broken record, and then there's the cycle. So how do we break the cycle, you ask? We get brave. We understand that the people in our life wants what's best for us, and that there are ways, if we're open enough, to talk about our needs and their needs, and to come up with something that is a different arrangement that's closer to what we both want. And it might not be perfect. And that's okay. And when you're talking to yourself and you're saying, girl, it's time. It's time to do something. No longer I want to hear you complain about you can't fit into your clothes, or you're not able to socialize, or you feel awkward. Sometimes it's time to do something about it. And having that difficult conversation is what's going to lead you there if you're able to receive the conversation. I think a really funny thing to think about is the quietness of avoidance, and how when we avoid, it's just this slow, nasty build. And it's quiet. It's not speaking loudly. It's not like, you better do this, like, when we get into like fight or flight, or if you can imagine like how you would be on, I don't know why my mind just went here, but like on an airplane, like, and like you're in an emergency situation, like you got to do and figure it out. Like our body's not in that. And we really truly feel like, okay, I don't have to have this conversation. Do I? I don't have to. I could keep going the way I am. And then you get to this point where you're like, well, what's the worst case scenario? Well, the worst case scenario is that nothing changes. So basically, AKA, the worst case scenario is you're living out the current life that you're living right now. And that's not what we want. We don't want your current situation to be the worst case scenario. We want a change. And we get to be our own advocates for this. I was reading this book called The Boundary Boss by Terry Cole, and she talks about overgiving, and on page 86, she says, overgiving and codependent behavior eventually lead to feeling empty because at the end of the day, there's nothing left for you. So sometimes when we have this idea like, okay, I want to have this conversation with this person. I won't. I'll just continue to give. And I don't know if you remember me telling you that story about when I told that girl that I didn't want to drive her home, and she was just like, okay, it's fine. The reaction was just so easy and simple, and I was so nervous to like have that conversation, but it was fine. And I didn't want to come off feeling selfish or feeling like I couldn't deliver. It was just I didn't want to anymore. It was emptying my energy. It was making it the experience not fun because that's all I was thinking about is driving someone else home. And sometimes you could be doing this without knowing this. In fact, a lot of times people will talk to me about the fact that they haven't made it to the studio simply because they're caring for everyone else in their home. They got this to do for the kids. They got this to do for their husband. They got to do that, all that stuff. They're over giving in a bunch of different areas versus giving to themselves. So this codependency idea is so interesting because it's like, when we think of codependency, we think about you're dependent on someone to do important things in your life. A high functioning codependent person is they're doing everything for everyone. They're dependent on that need of validation, which we're going to talk about soon. And they've lost the ability to self-validate. So therefore, they're getting all their validation by knowing that this person depends on them to do something, and that feels good for them. So they don't have any boundaries around those relationships. Yeah, she says, to be a high-functioning codependent means having a dysfunctional behavioral pattern. You feel overly responsible for the feeling and actions of others at the expense of your own desires, needs, and well-being. This book is called The Boundary Boss, so it's about creating and shaping boundaries. And sometimes the only way to execute a boundary is by discussing it and having that difficult conversation for it. So you're about to have this difficult conversation. You're feeling this stress, this tension. You might be overthinking. You might be spiraling. You might be having this resentment that's just lingering in your body, built up for as long as it's gone without you saying something. And then there's also exhaustion for pretending like everything's fine when it's not. You're in a state of performance versus living. You're talking around things versus talking through them. Remember, we say the only way forward is through. You're trying to control everything but your own truth. And honestly, that's a full-time job, doing that. You're putting on this performance, this big act that it's fine. But it's time to listen. It's time to receive. Because there are consequences to not saying the really hard thing. So when you avoid having a conversation, you're protecting other people's feelings over your own. You're staying nice, but you're not staying real. You're not authentic. You get temporary peace, but there's nothing long term there. There might be imaginary dialogues in your head instead of just having the talk. When I think about communicating and communication styles, I always try to operate from a place of authenticity. And the only way to do that is to be really, really clear on where you are, how you are, what you want, what you need. So it might be beneficial to have a daily check-in with yourself. And remember we talked about our wins not too long ago, and I suggested at the end of the day, you write down one win that was just like an everyday win, and then one bigger win that was towards your big goal, so that by the time you reached your big goal, you could be like really excited because you would see all of the steps. It was in that episode of You're Already There. This is kind of similar to that, but it would be maybe what you would do in the morning. And it's kind of like, hey, how are you? How are you feeling today? What do you need? What do you want? Because oftentimes it's so easy to get into autopilot where we're just like, this is what I gotta do. This is where I gotta be. This is what I'm gonna say. As opposed to like, hold on, like there's room for something else if you want it. And it might be hard at first and it can be worth it. So in the case of my future dance student, right? They're having these thoughts. Okay, I should probably dance. Or they might even say, like, something doesn't feel right. Then they say, what doesn't feel right? Well, you need something in your life. You used to have a hobby and you don't. Okay, I'm going to dance. Okay, when? Okay, how? Okay, where? Right? So now when that person wakes up in the morning, they can say, I'm feeling a little sad. I have lost myself and I really want something for me. I signed up for a dance class and I'm excited to go next week. That might be all they say. The real difficult conversation would be when the next week comes and that person didn't go. Remember last week when you were going to go do a dance class? Again, I'm trying to like articulate a conversation between yourself and yourself, which is kind of funny to do because it's like it's the dialogue in your head. So it's that following week and you're like, here's my check-in. I didn't go to the dance class. The difficult question is why? What did you put first before you? Oh, so your car is more important than you feeling like you can be at peace. Because when we can create an excuse, we can always create an excuse. Remember, I told you we're geniuses at that. If there's an excuse to be made, we'll figure it out. So sometimes not having these difficult conversations with yourself or others keeps you in places longer than you should be. Think about an expired relationship, an expired job, not confronting poor behavior from a client or a student. Maybe it's justifying your own burnout or justifying your lack of boundaries. Saying, it's not that bad. Or even saying, oh, I'll deal with it next month. Next month is last month's next month. And the truth is, you can't coach yourself through something that you're lying about. And sometimes there's deeper things that you could not be happy with yourself about. Maybe you're not happy with how you're showing up. Maybe you feel depleted. Maybe you've outgrown a version of yourself. Maybe you just really want something different and it just scares you so much. Maybe going back to boundaries, you said yes to something that you really didn't want. Maybe you're doing too much and you're naming that ambition. And really, it's fear, like an overcompensation. Like, I'll just keep doing this because I'm scared that like people will think I'm lazy or something like that. Maybe you keep blaming them and you haven't had an opportunity to look within. Having these conversations are the conversations that are going to pave your way forward. So when you are about to have these conversations, let's talk about some techniques for how to execute this as a divine goddess. So first of all, you want to understand what your goal is of the conversation. Like, what do you want to get out of it? Then you want to understand that there's got to be a sacred place for you to have a conversation. Like, have it be a nice place where you feel comfortable to share. It's not busy, you're not in the car, you've full attention. And you want to be direct because I notice that just in my short time of working with people, how beating around the bush people can be. And it's to the point where, are you trying to say this? And it's like, let's grow up and say what's on our mind. with assertiveness. So I always find that there's this scale that people kind of notice, and it's like passive aggressive or aggressive. Well, there's also what's in between, which is assertiveness. Assertiveness is a beautiful trait to have because it's direct, it says what you want, and it considers the other person. I think also avoiding the need or want to rehearse the conversation. I think like when you're thinking about why am I having this conversation and what do I want to get out of it, I think then you can kind of write down like maybe some notes just like in case you get nervous, you don't want to forget. But you can't really control the conversation because everything that you're going to prepare is going to be based off of what you think is going to happen based on the conversation. And sometimes you're not prepared that well for what is going to come back at you from having that conversation. So if you can learn to be completely authentic with yourself, you're going to know how to respond. And if you're present and not overwhelmed and not anxious and not distracted, you'll be able to be a good listener. And being a good listener is the skill of communicating just as much as talking. And sometimes over-fussing about the timing is just not realistic. So wait for a time, not the perfect time. And so when you're talking to yourself, the steps are a little bit different. When we're talking inside of our head, there's a lot going on in there all day. So getting pen and paper and putting something down that you can reference with a date on it, and then marking something in your calendar to get an opportunity to kind of just reflect back on things that you say. I have a really great friend, and she's got such a great memory that sometimes if I didn't write it down, I could be like, hey, do you remember this time I was feeling this? Like, what was I saying about that? I can't really remember. And she'll be like, oh yeah, you were saying this because of this. And I'll be like, oh yeah, that's right. Because we have a habit as humans to stack away the negative. And it's not in our forefront because good for our brain. Like we want to move on. But she can be like, oh, hey, remember this? And that is what your journal can do for you. Especially if you're making time to kind of have these reflection moments like, oh, well, what did I say last month? And it could be just one page where you're writing down like things that you just really want to get done, like maybe goals for the month. I'm going to execute this. I'm going to do this. And then you go back and you get to look at it and be like, oh, that's right. I forgot that I really wanted to do that. Or maybe the month gets away and then you can get recentered again and just like take that list and bring it over to the next month. So journal it, say it out loud, and remember it. Be honest. And just like with someone else, be kind. You get to treat yourself with the same kindness that you treat others. And if you start being mean to yourself, you'll listen and you'll feel a little less worthy. Sometimes the difference between feeling, acting, reacting is all kind of like jumbled. So understand that reacting is immediate. Feeling and understanding might take a little bit more time, and then you can have an action plan. So trying to avoid reacting. Understanding time and knowing that like something doesn't change just tomorrow just because you said it out loud or just because you journaled it. Change happens over time, and it takes consistency. When you're about to have this conversation with yourself, give yourself space to feel. Get centered with yourself, reminding yourself that clarity is freedom. It's not punishment. And then the last is just to anchor yourself in curiosity and not shame. Because you're allowed to change your mind, you're allowed to evolve, you're allowed to want something different, something better for yourself, and you're allowed to tell yourself the truth, even if it disrupts the version of you people are used to. So remember that discomfort does not equal danger. Honesty is not cruel. And silence/avoidance does not equal peace. It's also not protection. It's just postponement. And then getting really comfortable with this word and, because you can love someone and you can disappoint them. You can love yourself and still tell yourself the honest truth, which might be a kick in the butt. I thought about this the other day. I was teaching my strut intro class, and we drill very hard the strut, which is me teaching them how to walk in heels. And I tell them exactly like, I'm like, do this, watch this, straighten your leg. Everyone has different needs, obviously. So I had them like, recentered after we did a couple drills. And I was like, by the way, if you guys ever want me to like not tell you, like, let me know. And then one of them was like, well, that's why we're here. Like, we want to get better. We want to hear like what your feedback is. Like, that's what they hired me for. And I was just like, well, true. And also there could be a day that you show up and it just took so much for you to just get there that you might not want any feedback. And it was just such a cute moment because there I was like saying the hard truths, which was the hard conversations with my students. Like, hey, this is what you need to work on. Like, hey, this still hasn't changed yet. I'm still seeing your foot turned in. And just making sure that I'm reminding them. Because if I don't tell them the truth, like, how are they going to grow into be a better dancer? It's the same thing in life. Sugarcoating, what does that do? It can feel kind in the moment, but clarity is going to build trust. And I know that my students trust that I will tell them what they need to hear. So when you're scared to speak up, if you feel yourself shrinking, you can pull from your dancer self, from your performer self, from that moment where you're on stage, the part of you that's bold, that's certain. I mean, think about that energy when you just know your routine that well and you're performing it. Pull from that space, pull from that energy. Remember that power, because your performance you is not a mask. She's part of you. And as dancers, we get to lean into her to remind ourselves of our power. So just remember that there's a version of you who says the thing, who doesn't ghost her own truth, who doesn't hold back what her body already knows, who doesn't manage everyone else's comfort at the expense of her own. She's not some future version. She's here now in the present. She's just waiting for you to say, let's do this. Let's have the difficult conversation. So I hope that this is helpful for you. If it was, it would mean the world to me if you left a 5-star written review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the dance floor.